The street had always been quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like it held secrets rather than comfort. I had lived there for over a decade, married for nearly half that time, and yet I felt a strange emptiness that I couldn't quite name. The routine was predictable morning coffee, waving at neighbors through foggy windows, the soft hum of distant traffic, but it had grown heavy with silence, the kind that sinks into your bones until it feels permanent. My husband, busy with work and in different distractions, rarely noticed my moods, my small attempts at conversation, or the subtle weight of loneliness I carried. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to feel noticed, to feel seen. Then, one spring morning, the news spread like wildfire down the block. An American rapper, someone with fame and a presence that seemed larger than life, had moved into the house at the end of our street. At first, I thought it would be a passing rumor, just neighborhood gossip meant to stir curiosity. But soon, moving vans appeared, boxes were stacked high on the sidewalk, and the unmistakable sound of laughter, rich, warm, and full, echoed in a way that made the street feel alive for the first time in years. I watched from behind my curtains, pretending not to notice, my curiosity burning quietly inside me. He was unlike anyone I had seen in our small suburban stretch of identical houses. Broad-shouldered, casual in designer sneakers, yet humble in his movements, he carried boxes for the movers without complaint, sometimes pausing to joke with them, to share a laugh, or to lift an elderly neighbor's grocery bag with a surprising gentleness. Even the way he adjusted his cap or ran a hand through his hair seemed effortless, natural, not performative, not showy. It was as if kindness itself had taken a human form and chosen to live at the end of my street. I felt a strange stirring, one that confused me. There was no romantic thought at first, not really, only a spark of recognition that life, for a moment, was not gray and monotonous. I realized I hadn't felt that spark in years. Not in my marriage, not in my quiet life that had been dulled by routine. A pang of guilt followed immediately. Why did I feel drawn to him already? Why did seeing someone simply be kind and present make my heart beat a little faster? Over the next few days, I observed him from a distance. He helped a child with a bicycle chain, waved at neighbors with a genuine smile, carried groceries for a neighbor I had only ever nodded to in passing, and always there was laughter. Small, effortless, contagious. I began to notice the way my eyes lingered longer than they should, how I found excuses to peek from my window, to feel the warmth of his presence without ever speaking to him. There was a strange mix of excitement and shame, an emotion that felt dangerous yet intoxicating. I remember the afternoon he stepped onto our street carrying a box heavier than he looked, and a gust of wind caught the papers he was holding. Without hesitation, he crouched, collecting them, and smiled at me as if he already knew me. That smile, it was not a flirtation, not an attempt at charm, but a simple acknowledgement that I existed. My heart twisted with something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, being seen, being noticed. For a fleeting second, I imagined what it might be like to walk down the street and have someone like that, someone genuinely kind, look at me the same way. Yet even as the warmth spread, guilt followed closely. My husband, the man I had promised loyalty to, existed somewhere in the background of my mind. How could I feel alive in this moment when I had committed to a life that now felt so distant? The rapper, oblivious to the emotional stir he had caused, continued to move through the neighborhood with effortless generosity. He held doors for strangers, handed over bottled water to the mailman, paused to chat with a little girl selling lemonade on the corner. Each small act chipped away at the armor I had built around my heart. That evening, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, staring out into the fading sunlight as he walked past, carrying groceries for the elderly couple 2 doors down. His shadow stretched long across the pavement, and I realized I had been holding my breath for days without noticing. The quiet street no longer felt empty. It hummed with life I hadn't anticipated. And yet, the emptiness within me was still there, amplified by contrast. I went to bed that night, the sound of distant laughter echoing in my ears, and lay awake, turning over thoughts I had buried long ago. Why did a stranger's kindness affect me so deeply? Why did I feel a stirring in my chest that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years? I knew nothing improper had happened, yet my emotions felt like a storm waiting to break. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mix of hope and fear, a fragile awareness that life could still surprise me, that perhaps my own eyes had been closed too long. As sleep finally claimed me, I promised myself one thing. I would observe quietly, without crossing lines. I would allow myself to notice him, to acknowledge the warmth he brought, but I would not let it overshadow the life I had committed to. And yet, even as I whispered that vow to myself, a small, stubborn part of me wondered what it would mean if kindness could awaken a heart that had long forgotten how to feel. The days that followed felt strange, almost surreal. Life on the street continued, but the rhythm had shifted. Even mundane activities, walking to the mailbox, watering the plants, collecting the trash, were colored by an awareness of his presence. I found myself timing my errands just to catch a glimpse of him, to see the way he moved, to hear the low, casual laugh that seemed to ripple through the air without effort. It was an obsession, at least not entirely. It was a curiosity I hadn't felt in years, a sense of being alive in small, startling doses. One late afternoon, as the golden light fell across our street, I stepped outside to retrieve the newspaper. The sky was painted with shades of orange and lavender, and the air held that crispness that only early spring evenings bring. I noticed him struggling with a heavy box near the curb, a few groceries spilling onto the pavement. Without thinking, I walked over, instinctively offering to help. "Do you want a hand?" I asked, my voice sounding more nervous than I had intended. He looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to pause. There was no pretension in his gaze, no performance, just acknowledgement, a quiet recognition of my presence. "Thanks," he said simply, shifting the box onto the ground so I could grab one end. His voice was calm, warm, and entirely ordinary, yet it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. We lifted the box together, and I felt an unexpected surge of connection, as if our brief cooperation had created an invisible bridge between us. "It's heavier than I expected," he admitted, smiling faintly as he adjusted the grip. I nodded, trying to appear casual, though my hands were shaking slightly. There was a strange electricity in the air, an unspoken awareness that this encounter was more than just helping with groceries. I reminded myself firmly that he was a stranger, that my life, my marriage remained intact, yet I couldn't deny the thrill that coursed through me. As we carried the box inside his house, he made small talk, asking about the neighborhood, the weather, even the little details of our street that I had never noticed myself. There was an effortless ease in his words, a way of listening that made me feel as if I mattered. I realized I hadn't been listened to in years, not really listened to. My husband's attention had always been fragmented, distracted, and self-absorbed. In contrast, this stranger's attention was full, present, genuine. Over the next few days, these brief encounters multiplied. Sometimes he waved from his porch, sometimes our paths crossed by coincidence, while walking dogs or retrieving mail. Each interaction was small, yet it carried a weight that both thrilled and frightened me. He never overstepped boundaries, never made overtly flirtatious comments, but there was a subtle intimacy in his manner, the way he remembered my name, the way he asked about my day, the way he laughed at little things I had always thought were inconsequential. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the pavement, I found myself on my front porch, sipping tea and trying to appear absorbed in a book. He was walking past with a box of groceries for a neighbor, and when he saw me, he smiled a smile that seemed to acknowledge more than just a passing hello. "Evening," he said, his voice carrying softly across the space between our houses. "Evening," I replied, my words catching slightly in my throat. There was a tension in the air, delicate and fragile, like the first tremor before a storm. We spoke briefly about trivial things, the weather, the grocery store, a stray cat that had taken up residence near the curb, but beneath the surface, something more subtle and profound was stirring. A quiet understanding, a shared recognition of loneliness and longing that neither of us had voiced but both sensed. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, my thoughts restless. I kept replaying the brief interactions, analyzing every word, every glance. I scolded myself internally, reminding myself of my vows, my responsibilities, the life I had built with my husband. Yet even as I tried to suppress the stirrings within me, I couldn't deny their intensity. There was a life I had forgotten existed, vibrant, immediate, full of warmth and laughter, and it was now brushing against the edges of my own existence. I began to notice patterns in my own behavior. I walked past his house more often, lingering near his yard, finding excuses to be outside at the same time. My husband's absence, both physical and emotional, felt sharper in contrast. Every word exchanged with the rapper felt like a lifeline, a brief escape into a reality where I mattered, where someone saw me fully, without judgment or distraction. And yet, beneath the thrill, a quiet dread settled in. What did it mean to feel seen again after years of neglect? Was it betrayal to acknowledge this warmth, this gentle kindness that stirred my heart? The questions loomed, heavy and unanswerable, as I drifted off to sleep, wondering how long I could maintain the delicate balance between observation and emotional involvement. The presence of a stranger, someone whose kindness could awaken long-buried feelings, was beginning to reshape the landscape of my mind. I realized, with both fear and exhilaration, that the life I had accepted as ordinary might no longer be enough. The days grew warmer, and the street came alive with the subtle rhythm of neighborhood life, children playing, neighbors chatting over fences, the occasional car rumbling down the road. Yet amidst this familiar backdrop, my focus kept drifting to him. It was no longer just curiosity or fleeting admiration. There was a tangible pull, a magnetic force that drew my attention again and again toward his house, toward his presence. One afternoon, as I was pruning the rose bushes in my front yard, I noticed him stepping onto his porch, a small paper cup of coffee in hand. He waved, casual yet inviting, and then called out, "Hey, I'm heading to the corner cafe. Want to come along?" I froze, my hands sticky with sap and dirt, my heart pounding in a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. The words were innocent, friendly on the surface, yet the undertone, the gesture itself, carried an intimacy I couldn't ignore. I hesitated, glancing toward my own house, imagining my husband buried in his world, indifferent as always. I don't know, I murmured, unsure if the voice that answered me was cautious or desperate. He smiled softly, as if he understood the hesitation, and said, "No pressure, just thought I'd ask." And that was it. The simplicity of the invitation, the lack of expectation, made my pulse quicken. There was freedom in it, a subtle rebellion against the constraints that had defined my life for years. I found myself stepping into my shoes almost before I realized it. By the time I reached the cafe, he was already seated outside, sipping coffee, the sunlight glinting off the gold chain around his neck. He gestured for me to sit across from him, and I did, careful to maintain the composure that still felt necessary in public. We spoke at first of trivial matters, the weather, the sudden bloom of spring flowers, the peculiar habits of our street's stray cats, but slowly, the conversation deepened. He asked about my life, my routines, even the small frustrations I carried silently every day. I answered cautiously, revealing just enough, but there was an unspoken understanding that what I shared would be met with empathy, not judgment. At some point, the discussion turned to his own past, the struggles behind the fame, the loneliness, the unexpected lessons learned from the highs and lows of his career. His voice was honest, stripped of bravado, and I realized I had never heard anyone speak with such sincerity, such openness. In the midst of his stories, I found myself laughing, genuinely, for the first time in years. There was an ease between us, a quiet connection that felt both thrilling and terrifying. After the cafe, we walked together along the quiet streets, speaking of music, dreams, and the strange ways life could twist and turn. He listened as much as he spoke, giving me the rare gift of feeling truly heard. It was intoxicating, more than I could admit to myself. I knew the lines of propriety, the boundaries of commitment, yet in his presence, those lines seemed softer, more fragile, and my resolve wavered. When we returned, the sunlight was fading, painting the sky with streaks of pink and violet. He paused at his gate, turning toward me with that easy smile. "I'm glad you came," he said simply. It was innocent, casual, yet my chest tightened at the words, as if they carried a weight far beyond their meaning. I nodded, unable to speak, feeling a surge of emotion that was both exhilarating and frightening. The days that followed were a delicate dance. Small gestures, passing waves, shared smiles, the occasional brief conversation kept the tension simmering beneath the surface. I caught myself imagining what it would be like to spend more time with him, to laugh freely, to escape the constraints of a life that had grown monotonous and unfulfilling. Each thought made me feel guilty, but also undeniably alive. One evening, as I closed the blinds in my living room, I saw him across the street, lifting a ladder to clean the gutters. His shirt clung to his back, the sunlight catching the sheen of effort, and for a moment, I simply watched. There was no malice, no deliberate seduction, just a man moving through his world. And yet, in that ordinary act, I felt my heart respond with a longing I hadn't acknowledged in years. It was then that I realized something crucial. The emotional pull wasn't just attraction, it was awakening. His kindness, his attention, his presence, they had begun to illuminate the emptiness I had long ignored. My marriage, with all its security and familiarity, now felt confining, a cage I had grown accustomed to, but had never truly accepted. And though fear and guilt gnawed at me, a part of me thrilled at the thought of discovering life beyond the boundaries I had always known. The tension between what was right and what was real became a constant companion. Every smile, every shared glance, seemed to challenge my notions of loyalty and desire. I felt like a tightrope walker, balancing between duty and awakening, between the life I had chosen and the life that might be waiting for me if I allowed myself to step forward. And so, with each passing day, the invisible thread connecting us grew stronger. It was fragile, delicate, and perilous. Yet I could not resist its pull. In his presence, I glimpsed a version of myself I had long forgotten, a version capable of joy, of laughter, of being fully seen. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope. The days had begun to blur together, each one carrying the subtle, intoxicating weight of his presence. Our casual encounters became more frequent, each smile, each wave, layering upon the last until it felt impossible to ignore the pull between us. I told myself repeatedly that it was harmless, just neighborly kindness, but deep down, I knew the truth. There was a connection forming, one that defied explanation and threatened to unravel everything I had taken for granted. One late afternoon, I found myself outside, pretending to water the flowers while secretly hoping he would appear. He did not long after, walking down the street with that familiar easy stride, a slight smile on his face that made my heart leap. "Hey," he said casually, as if months of unspoken tension weren't hanging in the air between us. "Thought I'd check if you wanted to walk the block. It's nice out." I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. My hands trembled slightly as I turned off the hose, feeling the weight of anticipation settle over me. Walking beside him, the conversation flowed effortlessly. Music, movies, neighborhood, gossip, mundane topics, yet they carried a new resonance, a rhythm that matched the beating of my heart. And then, unexpectedly, the conversation shifted. He asked about my childhood, about dreams I had long buried beneath responsibility and routine. I found myself speaking more freely than I had in years, revealing fears, insecurities, and desires I had hidden even from myself. And when I glanced at him, I saw not judgment, but understanding, a rare, almost dangerous intimacy that made my pulse race. As we walked, I noticed a subtle change in the way he looked at me. There was a softness, a warmth, a longing I couldn't mistake. And then, almost casually, he said something that made my chest tighten. "I hope you know, you're more remarkable than you give yourself credit for." The words were innocent, almost offhand, yet their impact was profound. My mind spun with conflicting thoughts: guilt, desire, and a desperate yearning for the attention I had longed for in silence. We stopped at a small park, the kind with a faded swing set and a cracked bench. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. He sat on the bench, and without thinking, I joined him. Silence fell between us, but it was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Then came the first confession, almost whispered, almost lost in the hum of the evening. I enjoy spending time with you," he admitted, his eyes searching mine for a reaction. The simplicity of the statement, its honesty, struck me like lightning. My chest tightened, and I felt a rush of emotions I could barely name. Relief, guilt, excitement, fear, they all collided in an overwhelming tide. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words faltered. How could I explain the whirlwind of feelings inside me? How could I admit that his presence had awakened something I thought I had long buried? Instead, I nodded, a silent acknowledgement, and for a brief moment, the world around us seemed to fade. Walking back, every step felt charged with energy. The familiar streets now seemed different, imbued with a new potential, a new danger. Each glance exchanged, each casual touch, as our hands brushed, carried a weight that neither of us could fully articulate. The line between friendship and something more was blurring, and I felt the thrill and terror of standing on the edge of an emotional precipice. That night, I lay awake, replaying the afternoon over and over. I thought of my husband, of the life I had built, of the promises I had made. And yet, in the quiet of my bedroom, it was impossible to deny the awakening stirring inside me. His kindness, his attention, his genuine interest, it had cracked open a part of me I had long ignored. And the realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Over the following days, our encounters grew bolder in subtle ways. A hand lingered a fraction longer on the gate, a smile held just a beat too long, a conversation ventured into deeper territory. The tension was palpable, yet carefully unspoken, like a melody playing beneath the surface, hinting at desires neither of us fully dared to name aloud. I found myself yearning for these moments, stealing glances whenever he was nearby, imagining conversations that had not yet occurred, fantasies that were as dangerous as they were intoxicating. The world outside seemed to fade when he was near, leaving only the raw, vivid reality of our connection, a reality I could no longer pretend was harmless. One evening, as I closed the blinds and watched him across the street, adjusting the porch light, a sudden realization struck me. I was standing on the edge of a decision, teetering between loyalty and awakening, between a life of comfort and a life of possibility. The pull toward him was undeniable, and for the first time, I admitted to myself that the line I had sworn never to cross might already be behind me. The danger of desire, the thrill of connection, and the haunting pull of emotional intimacy they had intertwined in a way that left me both terrified and alive. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I knew that the coming days would challenge every boundary I had ever set. The days following our walk and quiet confession felt charged with a tension I could barely contain. Every encounter, no matter how casual, carried a weight I had never experienced before. A simple wave across the street, a shared laugh over a minor annoyance. Even the way he adjusted his cap or ran a hand through his hair, it all felt magnified, charged with meaning I could neither deny nor fully comprehend. I began noticing small, deliberate ways he lingered in my world. A package left on my porch with no note, only a subtle smile when I opened the door. A wave from his driveway that lasted a heartbeat longer than necessary. Even his music blasting through open windows seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of my racing heart. I told myself it was harmless, just gestures of a kind neighbor. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. One evening, as dusk settled over the street, I found him outside, struggling with a large speaker he'd promised to bring down for a block party. I offered to help, and together we wrestled with the cumbersome equipment, our bodies brushing in ways that made my skin tingle. Laughter bubbled up between us, unrestrained and warm, carrying a spark that neither of us could ignore. As we finally set the speaker in place, we paused, catching our breath. I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and deliberate. My chest tightened under the intensity, and I realized just how much I had begun to crave these moments, these shared touches, this unspoken closeness. You always know how to make even the hardest task feel easier, he said, his voice low and sincere. My stomach fluttered, a sensation both thrilling and terrifying. That night, I lay awake replaying the day, heart hammering at the memory of his hand brushing mine, the warmth of his laugh lingering in my ears. Guilt gnawed at me, thoughts of my husband, our life together, but so did desire. The tug of war inside me was relentless, a storm I had no desire to calm. The following days escalated this delicate dance. He would stop by, accidentally, while I was in the yard, offering small favors or asking for advice about music, landscaping, anything that required my attention. Each visit was loaded with subtle glances, soft laughter, and fleeting touches that left me dizzy and breathless. My heart beat faster at his every word, every casual compliment, every shared secret. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in purples and golds, he suggested a walk. "A block," he said. "Nothing more." I hesitated, knowing it was a simple gesture, but also knowing it carried the unspoken promise of intimacy. I nodded, stepping outside, feeling the cool breeze brush my skin, mingling with the warmth of anticipation. We walked in silence for a while, each step echoing the unspoken truths between us. Then he stopped, turning to face me, his expression soft, open, vulnerable. "I've wanted to tell you something," he said, hesitating. "Something I probably shouldn't admit, but I can't stop thinking about you." My breath caught. The confession, though anticipated, hit me like a tidal wave. Every nerve in my body seemed to come alive. Desire, fear, guilt, and longing collided in a dizzying swirl. I feel the same," I whispered, almost afraid to give voice to the truth. And then it happened, the first kiss. Gentle at first, tentative, testing the waters, a collision of curiosity and longing. The world fell away around us. The street, the fences, the quiet suburban houses faded into nothing. All that remained was the heat of his lips against mine, the intoxicating knowledge that this was real, that this was dangerous, and that it was exactly what I had been craving without knowing it. We pulled back slightly, our foreheads resting together, breaths mingling, hearts racing in perfect unison. The street seemed impossibly quiet, as if holding its breath, aware of the seismic shift between us. "We can't," I whispered, guilt striking like a cold blade. I have a life, responsibilities." He smiled softly, brushing a stray hair from my face. "I know," he said, "but right now, this is us. Just this moment. Nothing else matters." The tension between us had broken its dam, flooding into uncharted territory. Each encounter thereafter carried the weight of possibility, the thrill of temptation, and the risk of discovery. I became acutely aware of the danger in my own desire, the fragility of my boundaries, the strength of the pull I could no longer resist. Even mundane interactions became electric. A brush of hands in the grocery store, a shared joke while watering the plants, a fleeting glance across the street. Each one felt loaded with meaning. Each one a test of willpower I was increasingly failing. And yet, beneath the exhilaration was a gnawing, constant guilt. I knew the path I was on was treacherous. I knew it could destroy everything I had built, everything I had promised. But the pull, the undeniable connection, the warmth and understanding he offered, it was a temptation too strong to deny. By the end of that week, I realized something terrifying and thrilling. I was no longer just drawn to him. I was caught in a web of desire and emotion, one that threatened to unravel the life I had once thought unshakable. And deep down, I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The days after that first kiss were unlike anything I had ever experienced. Every glance from him, every subtle touch, every word exchanged felt heavier, more meaningful. Our interactions were no longer casual neighborly gestures. They were loaded with desire, tension, and unspoken understanding. My mind raced constantly, torn between the comfort of my life and the magnetic pull of this forbidden connection. I began noticing the small things I had ignored before. The way he lingered just a moment too long at the mailbox, the warmth in his eyes when he caught mine, the way his laughter seemed to echo in my chest. Each moment reminded me that the line I had promised myself I wouldn't cross had already blurred. I felt exhilarated and terrified at the same time, as if walking a tightrope suspended over an endless void. Then came the day of the inevitable confrontation my husband noticed. It was subtle at first. Questions about why I seemed distracted. Comments on how often I smiled at the street, an instinctive suspicion that gnawed at him. I wanted to lie, to shield this secret at all costs, but guilt weighed heavily on my conscience. The reality of what I was doing could no longer be ignored. I tried to maintain the facade of normalcy, but it was impossible. Every encounter with him brought waves of desire I couldn't contain, and every interaction with my husband felt hollow and strained. I began withdrawing emotionally, finding excuses to avoid conversation, avoiding his touch, even when I longed for it. The tension grew unbearable, a silent storm threatening to spill over. One evening, he came to the porch, ostensibly to return a book I had lent him. The air between us was thick with anticipation, and I could feel my heart pounding as he approached. He looked at me with that intense gaze, the one that always made me forget everything else, and I knew he could see the turmoil inside me. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, voice low and almost desperate. "Every moment we spend together, it feels like we're meant to be in some impossible way." I wanted to respond, to tell him that I felt the same, but the words caught in my throat. The reality of my life, of my marriage, of my promises, pressed down on me like an immovable weight. Instead, I shook my head, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. I can't," I whispered. Us, it's dangerous, for both of us." He reached out, gently lifting my chin so I met his gaze. "Sometimes the heart knows what the mind can't accept," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight. Just let me be honest with you. Let me be here." The honesty in his words, the sincerity in his touch, broke something inside me. I wanted to surrender completely, to give in to the passion and connection I had been craving. But I also knew that doing so would shatter my life, betray trust I could never reclaim. It was a choice between fleeting happiness and lifelong consequences. Days passed in a haze of longing and restraint. I found myself standing at the crossroads of desire and duty, torn between the intoxicating thrill of the connection we shared and the quiet, steady love I had promised my husband. Every encounter with him was a battle between temptation and reason. I wanted to run to him, to throw caution to the wind, yet I feared the fallout, the destruction it would bring. Then came the pivotal moment, an evening when my husband returned early from work. He had noticed my withdrawal, my distant demeanor, and he wanted answers. Sitting across from him at the kitchen table, I felt the weight of my secret pressing down like never before. I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't hide the truth without breaking myself. There's someone," I confessed, voice trembling. "I don't know how it happened, but I've been feeling something for someone else." The words hung in the air like shards of glass. My husband's face fell, a mixture of hurt, confusion, and disbelief reflected in his eyes. "What? Who?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. The room felt impossibly small, charged with the gravity of the revelation. I couldn't say his name, not yet, but I could admit that my heart had wandered, that temptation had tested the very foundation of our life together. "It's someone from the street," I said finally. "Someone who's awakened something inside me I didn't know existed." The fallout was immediate. Tension, tears, and harsh words replaced the quiet comfort of our home. Yet, amidst the chaos, I realized something crucial. I could no longer pretend, no longer live divided between duty and desire. The connection I felt for him, the honesty and passion, had shown me a part of myself I had denied for too long. In the days that followed, I made my choice not lightly, not without pain, but with the clarity that came from confronting my heart. I couldn't stay trapped in a life that no longer fit, that no longer made me feel alive. I knew there would be consequences, heartbreak, and judgment. But I also knew that to ignore this awakening would be a betrayal to myself. And so, I stepped into the unknown, carrying both fear and hope, ready to face the consequences of my choices, and finally willing to embrace the life and love that had been waiting for me just across the street.